Mesa is not a bad frame, to preface this, but what I am saying is that I think there are a lot of newer frames that offer a lot of what Mesa offers, and then some with extra comfort. Jade being one of them. Like, is she doing less damage than Mesa? Sure. But overall, I think that having this free flight mobility, along with much better damage reduction compared to Shatter Shield in some instances, especially because it's damage reduction from all sources, not just incoming bullets. I think that she's just a lot safer as a frame, and has a lot more flexibility to work in most situations compared to Mesa, where Mesa is often having to rely on shield gating, at least some of the time. You know, Shadow Shield does put in work, but it's usually on a very low shield count. I think that Jade offers much more protection and security, while still offering a very acceptable damage output, with a lot of the same utilities that Mesa would have. And I think that that's kind of a chronic issue, is that we get stuck to a lot of these older frames and don't give the newer ones a chance. And I think that if people did, I feel like people did that a little bit more often. Like, I don't know why I don't see Jade often is used as much as I feel like she should be, but like, people always say, oh, Mesa, 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 you know, super good, but like, I would say that Jade is on par with almost as good as Dante is, like, you know, as like the two big name frames that got released in that year, or kind of in that very, in that window, I would say, from like Jade Shadows, through Dante's update. I'd say, like, those are the two, like, really big shining stars that released that I think are going to be enduring, and I think, like, especially as time goes on, more people are going to realize that these frames are really, really good. So give them a shot. I think that people don't give some of these frames their fair due, especially if they're older players. Newer players, I don't think, have this problem as much. I think that it is really very much like an old head kind of problem, if you will. Like, oh, why use these new frames if Mesa just, you point and shoot adventure, blah, 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 you know, that whole old song and dance, so to speak. Or Sairn, for instance. A lot of people are very dead set on Sairn, and a lot of old mains, when I think that these people would enjoy new frames more. Like, I was talking to one of my very close friends recently, who is the, you know, diehard Rhino main, founder, you know, super gung-ho, and I was like, just try Kalervo, right? And I don't think he's gone back to Rhino since. It was basically that bird meme where, you know, you shove the spoon in their mouth, and they're yelling, they're protesting, but as soon as they taste that food, as soon as they even get just like a little lick of it, they're like, wait, this is pretty good, and then they can't get enough of it. It's just getting a lot of these older players to, you know, try some of these newer frames, and they might really, really like them. You know, that's something that I've been committing myself to, is giving some of these, like, newer frames, or frames that I wouldn't have otherwise played, a shot. And, like, seeing if, you know, I find something I really, really like. You know, Jade is one of those. Like, I actually gave her due investment, and she feels really good and comfortable to use. And I'm very glad that I did so. Like, especially after a lot of these Exalted reworks, that people don't realize how effective they've been at boosting a lot of these frames. Because, like, the thing with Mesa, right? Like, I know I keep bringing up Mesa, but that's because I'm just comparing her to Jade. For example, right, is that, you know, Mesa does the damage. She's super crazy at DPS. You know, she can fight a lot of the, you know, damage-attenuated enemies just because of her sheer, you know, rate of fire. But I feel like her damage is almost overkill in a lot of cases, and Jade is still plenty of damage, but in exchange she just gets so many more tools. Like, she can also buff her teammates, or, you know, have, you know, extra defensive capabilities, or give for herself a self buff if she really wants to with one of her three, or she can just be like Mesa and just sit in her 4 and do what she needs to do. And she also doesn't have the mobility limitation that, you know, Mesa does in her 4, and that's even if she's mobility limited with Mesa's Waltz. I think that you know, given the circumstance, a lot of people would come around to Jade more often. And again, like I said, this is not to say everyone, or this is a necessarily broad statements, but it's such, I've just noticed a common trend of, you know, people don't go outside of their comfort zone enough, and then, like, a lot of these new frames feel like they are tailor-made for specific people in mind. Right? An augment similar to Wisp, I feel like she will get that probably eventually, too. I can see that happening. Yeah, like I said, a lot of these, like, newer frames feel like tailor-made versions of existing frames, you know? Again, like, people who are, like, really, you know, gung-ho about Mesa, I feel would really, really get a kick out of Jade. Or, you know, like, people who are, like, old Rhino players would really, you know, do good to give Dante or Kalervo a shot. This is another example. Like, what are some other, like, newer frames that people, you know, would really do well with trying? You know, I've heard, like, a lot of good praise of Varuna. Oh, I really need to pay attention where I'm going. I've heard a lot of praise of Varuna as well as, you know, like, a pretty decent stealth frames, you know? Maybe people who are kind of diehard with Loki might, you know, get a kick out of trying her. She's got a lot of interesting technical play that she can do. Citrine is a really great example, you know. Wisp is a bit of a newer frame, mind you, and I use newer very, very loosely. I know she's more than a couple of years old at this point. But, you know, people who are, you know, really diehard supports might really get a, you know, a good kick out of Citrine, because Citrine can do more than just support. Where, like, Wisp's support is really good, but Citrine has a lot of interesting tools besides that support. You know, that's the thing with a lot of these new frames, is that they can do a lot of what older frames do, not quite as well, but then they get something extra on top of it that makes them, you know, really worth considering. You know, again, back to the example, Jade doesn't do as much damage as Mesa, but she gets more survivability and just general comfort and ease of use on top of it. You know, very... Like, I can just sit in her 4 for, like, a long-ass time and just not worry about it. I don't have to worry about maintaining Shadow Shield or recasting it. I just have all that DR innate to the 4, on top of, you know, the Aviator reductions that she gets. Just for free. And, you know, granted, I get it, you know, some people might not like Jade, you know, as much because of her theming. You know, people don't like the whole fucking pregnant thing. And you know what? I get it. That's fair. If that's not you, that's fine. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think she looks fine. Great frame visually. I'm not personally bothered by that whole concept. I know that some people were, especially on release, and that might have, you know, part to do with it, but... Another newer frame, Korvix, like, yeah, he struggled on release, so that's probably why people haven't given him a fair shot. But, you know, now that he has an augment, he's an amazing frame, you know. Kind of a one-button chump, I guess. But, you know, he's still very, like, it's still very good at what he does. Again, granted, what he does, it does have some fragile limitations, but... Flare is another one of those frames where it's like, I think that they have a lot of potential to be good. I think if people gave the time to explore it. Like, I have not played Flare enough. I just got them, subsumed them, because I was more concerned with pyrotechnics at that point. But I think that, again, you know, having an exalted weapon is already a really, really good sign for them. That gives them a lot of potential as is, because exalted weapons now, after their rework, have been, you know, kind of a hallmark of a good frame, essentially. Rather than, you know, being a hit or miss like they used to be. Like, Baruch is one of those frames that I feel took a while to catch on, and now is, you know, kind of in that, like, you know, Hall of the Greats, quote-unquote, of, like, old but gold frames. Yeah, I guess in general, just give older frames or newer frames a shot. If, you know, you're an old head, you're stuck in your frames, just try them out. Give them a chance, and I think you will be pleasantly surprised.